Thank you for staying with us. Professor Salako is here, who's the Director General of the Nigeria Institute of Medical Research. He said officially by an Act of Parliament 1977, but before then the Institute's been there. Yes. So the Institute was there at the time of the Spanish flu.
I would think so.
Okay.
I think Spanish flu must be earlier than that.
No, the pandemic of 1918 or
18,
thereabouts.
yes.
So the
that's
Institute
earlier
was,
than that.
Okay, we had something that could say, okay, we're gathering data. But since 1977 till date, would you say the Institute has fared well?
Very well.
How would you say so?
The Institute has been involved in carrying out research and services in some of the very common diseases within the country. And I take HIV as an example. The first case of HIV was diagnosed through research in Nigeria at the Institute. And that has put the Institute at the forefront of HIV research and program in the country since then. The Institute was also very prominent in ensuring that the country started to use generic and antiviral or anti-HIV agents when it started, because branded drugs were very expensive and not many people were able to get treatment at the time. So the Institute did a clinical trial on generic drugs and showed that the generic drugs were as effective as the branded one, and that they have equal side effects that those other drugs have. So they compared favorably with them. And so it became a policy for the Nigerian government to use generic antiviral agent. That study came from the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research. And there have been a lot of malaria program and treatment research that came from the Institute. In the last few years, the Institute looked at the insecticide-impregnated bed nets that was distributed all over the country and looked at their effectiveness in preventing mosquitoes from biting those who use them, and came up with the fact that many of those impregnated bed nets were not effective to prevent mosquitoes from biting people. And that explains why malaria infection has continued to rage on within the country. Now, the importance of that is that what was used to impregnate the net needed to be changed. And this information has been appropriately passed to the Ministry of Health at the time when we found that out. Now, we had done a lot of training because at the beginning of the HIV treatment and services, we had to train a lot of health workers and non-health workers, since the deluge of number of HIV cases that we have was getting bigger beyond what just doctors and nurses alone can face. So there were issues of bringing up volunteers who may not be medical practitioners, who are thought to join in the management of patients with HIV at the time. So this has expanded the opportunities for HIV patients to access treatment within the Institute and other areas within the country where such patients are being treated. Now, in the last few years, we have moved on more to genomics research because the world these days talk about genomics, they talk about personalized medicine, and this cannot be done without that. So we have acquired a few sequencers that can assist in sequencing agents or viruses or bacteria, any organisms at all, to determine their architecture, and therefore possibly determine some areas within the architecture that can be targeted for treatment, development of drugs, or sometimes development of diagnostics. And on that, we got the ISO certification for some of our labs. That is international recognition, which means that reports from that lab is comparable to reports from such labs anywhere in the world.
You see, you're reading out some of the achievements of the institute, and a lot of people were like, okay, so we have such a remarkable organization in our country, and it's been there for over 40 years. But how much of impact are they having? For instance, in this pandemic now, is the institution involved in the coronavirus pandemic in terms of, because we had the Commissioner for Information here talking about research is going on now to find out how the virus is behaving in our environment. Is the institute part of what's going on?
Well, I will say that started from our institute. We're working with the Lagos State government, not only to determine the community behavior and response to the virus, but also to look at agents that could be used to treat the virus, because it's a new virus, so it requires new drugs to be developed. And if you have to develop a new drug now, it will take ages. So what can be done is to repurpose some agents that have been seen to be effective against certain viruses before. Similar viruses, I mean, like the SARS and the MERS in the past. So some of the drugs that were used to treat those viruses are currently being tried to determine their efficacy on this current outbreak. And of course, that's what brought about the issue of chloroquine, which is a drug that has been used for many years in Nigeria and Africa. So it's a very familiar drug. We're used to the side effects, we're used to its efficacy, except that it's not effective any longer against malaria. So it's been repurposed for coronavirus infection, so that
the
we
research
can,
is still going
it's still on, so that we can appropriately provide information to the Nigerian populace about whether they could use chloroquine or not.
Okay. Are you also looking at any herbs and things? Because we hear that some countries, I think, like, is it Swaziland?
Madagascar?
Yes. That they are looking at some herbs which may be effective in the treatment of
Yes.
COVID-19.
Yes, China, for example, is well known for a well-developed phytomedicine. And so they were able to deploy the use of herbal medicine for their mild to moderate cases. Okay. Now, here in Nigeria, the structure for that kind of treatment is not on ground, because the acceptability of herbal medicine by everybody, and when I mean everybody, including healthcare workers and government itself, is not clear where they stand. And so it becomes an ethical issue if you take herbal medicine officially to give a patient with COVID-19 when you have standard treatment. Even though standard treatment that we have now cannot boast of cure.
Okay, we'll take a moment and come back to continue the conversation at this point. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We still have Professor Salako, who is the Director General of the Nigerian Institute for Medical Research. Prof, I'm just thinking of how to put this. Yes, the Institute has been at the forefront, or part of the team, studying the COVID-19 situation and working out solutions. Is there a solution in sight?
It's a very
okay, let's put it this way. Is there hope?
Well, there's always hope. I say that because scientists continue to work.
Yeah, scientists.
When you
say scientists, I think you're...
We continue to work on solutions. And of recent, I read that the first vaccine trial was going on in the UK, even though ordinarily it would take a long time to get a vaccine developed. But with some kind of new techniques, it may be possible for a vaccine to come up within the next 6 months, to be tried within the next 6 months again. So for us to have an effective vaccine, it will take not less than a year. So this one that is being tried, I imagine that is probably just to see whether it can do anything at all.
But the trials in the UK?
The one in the UK.
Okay.
So, and they are not the only one doing that. There are quite a number of candidate vaccines that WHO has approved for people to try.
Right.
Now, that will be the only hope. What may perhaps happen is that the disease will go through a natural course and probably disappear before the vaccine gets ready. Even the last the SARS and MERS of those days, the vaccines developed were not successful at the time. If they were, perhaps that vaccine would have been repurposed for this, because they are the same class of virus, except that this is just a new class, a new part.
You know, while we're trying to be careful before we set some people down the path of using things that they cannot account for, I would ask again, you talked about repurposing some things that have been used for other treatments and in the place of research, while they're researching on that. Alera mentioned some countries that are turning to the traditional herbs that they have in their area to see a way forward. Is that also part of what the Institute is looking at in the bid to find a light at the end of the tunnel?
It will be a big challenge for us to bring up an unknown herbal medicine, to try it on a disease that
is unknown as well.
That's also unknown, and everybody is just looking for a new cure. And there are standard procedures for you to get a drug to be accepted and recognized for official treatment of such diseases. And that cannot happen now with herbal medicine. People could take them on their own. But for you to get an approval at this stage in Nigeria, if we are talking about countries where those platform has been set, and you already have the process through which you can take those drugs to give the patient, yes. But here we are, we don't have a clear-cut platform for which you can take herbal medicine and then use it in an outbreak.
But Prof, we have often heard that most of these medications that we take actually contain some bark of tree or some leaf or something in some kind of refined form. So if you tested some natural herb or something that proved effective, could your research not refine it in such a way that that tree or leaf or whatever would be a content of this particular pill which you're going to test for the cure of?
You see, what we are trying to prove is that this new drug works as well as the standard therapy that we are giving now, or works better than it. Now, to get a herbal medicine to the orthodox standard, you require several phases of trial. And those phases of trial, they don't take 3 years or longer. 6 years. They take longer than that. So those ones that have become orthodox medicine, like the current anti-malaria treatment, the aspirins, and they went through that process. And then they became refined and can be manufactured. They have been studied, their side effects are known, the doses are known, the drug interactions are known. But for these new ones, you don't know. So it's difficult to officially deploy them. But if you have volunteers, because usually in drug development, you have a group of volunteers who says, I'm giving myself to you for this test. You can give them, but they have to sign consent.
Do you have such in Nigeria?
No, there are volunteers for such, but you don't get them easily because you have to talk to them, you have to explain to them the danger in doing so. Every information that is required must be given to them so that if on the long run they suffer from the side effects of treatment, it will not be like we were not told before.
So is the Institute organizing any kind of tests at the moment
For
the COVID-19?
Yes, our lab is part of the national lab. In fact, our lab started testing for COVID-19 before the index case came to Nigeria. We had...
January or February?
We started in December, December/January, because the infection has started raging on in China around December. And nobody knows it was going to be a pandemic like this. But we had network and collaboration with China CDC. And I had to send 3 of my young researchers to spend 3 months with China CDC at the time. So they were to learn pathogen identification because we were sure that outbreaks will not be limited only to Ebola. The outbreaks will always come. But what has happened in Nigeria is that we will not be able to diagnose. We send samples to outside Nigeria. So I said, no, let's build the capacity within. So we sent 2 people to where we used to send samples to in Senegal to learn about pathogen identification. So we have 5 of these young men who came back, and then we got this kit that was being used in China to diagnose COVID-19 back to Nigeria. And we were trying to develop an in-house kit, using that kit, as a standard for us. That's a different story. The point is,
which we would like to hear.
Yeah.
So we want to know how far you've gone with developing that
people
kit.
who were coming back from outside the country, who are aware of the disease, were calling us. Can you do this test? And so we're doing the test. We're doing the test for them. Well, so that when the first case came, we had a meeting at the Ministry of Health, and I had to tell the Honorable Minister, look, this is what our institute has been doing. So the Honorable Minister then said, oh, okay, so your lab should be part of the network of labs in Nigeria. That's how we came on board. And since then, we've been doing, I think we've screened more than 1,000 as I speak. And we recently started a drive-through in Yaba, which is free for people. All they need to do is get into our website and book an appointment, and then they get invited. So you just drive in, you don't come out of your car, you get tested, and you drive out. And you get your result in 48 hours.
Okay, so those kits are working.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Wait,
Now,
wait,
let's look at Lassa fever. That has been with us for longer. How far has work gone on Lassa fever?
Now, the issue of Lassa fever, unfortunately, has been more of fire brigade approach. And I think that the government needs to give out a specific research fund for Lassa. That is the only way
Funding.
you can sort it out. No, there are brilliant researchers in Nigeria. We can begin to look at diagnostics. We can begin to look at drug. We can also begin to look at the public health approach to people's behavior or vectors' behavior so that we can determine why this disease keeps coming, from time to time. But if all we do is when it comes, we start to trace them and treat some people, and then the season goes, and then we go back to sleep. There's no way we can sort out issue of Lassa like that.
No, okay, there's this tweet that's coming about a 1 Doka test kit from Senegal. You heard about it?
No?
It said it's being used for testing the coronavirus. $1 test kit from Senegal.
You see, that, like I told you,
all
that
manner of test kits out there.
people can develop their own test kits, okay, like we are trying to do. All sorts of tests. We've been inundated by, oh, can you tell government to use this test? Can you try it? We just finished testing one antibody-based test, which will take like 10 to 20 minutes that can be used within the community to screen. Now, government is not using that because they don't know the sensitivity that is, if it says the disease is there, is the disease there? And if it says the disease is not there, is the disease not there truly? All that tests need to be done for each of the kids. And if those things were not at certain level, close to 90 to 100%, they are unlikely to be allowed to be used. Because that means that you are going to be having false negative results. People who have the disease, the test will say they don't have it. That's a problem.
Okay.
So that's why government has been very careful in accepting some of these tests that are being, kits that are being thrown around.
Okay, let's talk a bit about funding. In all of these things, you started testing and researching this COVID-19 from December, you said. You sent out a team to go study in Senegal and China. And I know that you do, or I do understand that you have some people in other places also studying, and research is going on across the world and indeed Nigeria. How is all of this funded?
Well, those are our internal funding and support from our partners. That's why we're able to keep people in China. I mean, for those who went to China, for example, all we did was to pay their airfare, and then if some small amount of funds, stipend, the boys really sacrificed. If they didn't get the usual government rate, because they all know that they are going to pick up knowledge that will be useful for them and useful for the country. So the partners housed them, and that was how it was possible for us to do that.
So, okay, I was going to, so in terms of funding here, it's strictly from partners. How much, do you get any funding from government?
Oh, we get funding from government, but the kind of funding we get from government, it's usually an envelope. It's like nobody knows the size of your shoe, but they just buy one for you and say, put it inside. Whether it takes your shoe or not, that's what we have for you. And so you have to decide how to wear that shoe. Whatever you need to do to make it comfortable to accept your leg is what you do. That's the kind of thing we get. But we are saying that we must, as a nation, have dedicated fund for research, and I mean medical research.
Okay. Now, we have to wind down now, but I think you need to answer this question. Olawale says, why won't the Ministry of Health know that the Research Institute was capable of running the COVID-19 test until you all had a meeting? Does the ministry not oversee the institute?
Well, the COVID-19 is a new disease, so nobody knows what capacity anybody has unless you sit down and have a meeting. And so it was appropriate for the ministry to bring people together to say, look, we are facing this problem. What are your capacities? What can you do? How do we move forward? So it wasn't anything strange, really.
Okay. Well, Professor Babatunde Salako is the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, YABA. Thank you very much for coming on Sunrise this morning.
Thank you for having me.
We wish you luck with your research on the COVID-19, because the whole world is praying for a cure. And if it comes from Nigeria, what's wrong with that?
Oh, fine, fine.
Sunrise will be right back with the home stretch in just a moment. Stay with us.